finance minister for the Republic of Indonesia. She requires no introduction past that. Welcome, Minister. Thank you for taking the time.
My pleasure, Jeffrey. Good morning to you and Kevin also. Good to see you both.
It's great to have you.
Minister, I wanted to start with just a stock take of where we are now. We are halfway through the second term of the president's time in office. There have been a number of set piece reforms. What would you say best describes, but on the other hand, there have been a number of rather seismic changes, not least the rise in commodity prices and the war in Eastern Europe. How would you characterize the overall priorities and the list of what you would hope to get done in the remaining 2 years?
Well, this is really a very extraordinary time for the second term of President Jokowi. To be very honest, we were actually started with a very high, ambitious, optimistic that this is going to be the second term in which we are going to continue many of a very important program, whether this is related to the reform. So that's why we pass and continue drafting at that time the law on omnibus law on the job creation. We also continue designing on how the infrastructure building need to be expanded in Indonesia so that it will be more connected, more efficient, more productive. We also creating reform on bureaucracy as well as regulatory by introducing and simplifying the investment procedure and policy. We look at how to really cut the red tape. So these are all the what we call it the priority. In addition to, of course, the top priority in Indonesia, because we have a young demographic population. We put a heavy attention on human capital like education, social protection, as well as health. So these are all the area that we think that it's going to be like preparing Indonesia to become middle upper income country, continuing our endeavor to become an advanced country. And then we hit hard by this pandemic. The whole world halted by this. I mean, no country actually, in this case, spare from this pandemic threat. And the implication is not only on a health issue, you know, Jeffrey, it is a health issue. It's threatening the safety and the health of the people, but the implication on the social side, economic side, and even to some country is a political side, because it's really depend on how the country and the government were able to handle this very unprecedented, extraordinary threat to the economy, to the people, as well as to the society. So that is the area that we are trying to manage during the first year after the election. We turn around almost all instruments in order for us to be able to handle the health issue. There is what we call it emergency law, which we are allowing to have fiscal, that is tools, our budget to be able to have a deficit above 3%. Indonesia for almost 20 years has been very disciplined using our budget in order for us to have a more sustainability and also fiscal instrument which is reliable, facing with many uncertainty. So for the first time in Indonesia, after Reformasi, we have the deficit which is way above 3%, 6.1%, actually double. And then we also allowing to have a more flexibility in changing the spending, because what we are facing is a virus, which is not really a human being, which we can discuss and talk. So they are just mutated into a new variant and so on. And then at the same time, we have to be able to, while we are busy and overwhelmed by this COVID, we have to continue reforming and preparing what you just asking. What is exactly the priority of this government? At some point, this pandemic will over. But then how we are going to come up from this pandemic? Are we come up as a good winner, or just so, or even as a loser in this case? That is the question that we are asking when we are dealing with this pandemic. And that's why even during this pandemic, in which the president have established a weekly meeting to monitor the pandemic, we also continue implementing some important reform. As I said, the omnibus law on job creation has been passed. I've already passed two very important legislation on a taxation and fiscal relation with the local government. This is going to be one of the most important on how the fiscal policy is going to be then strengthened in the medium long term, because we have to admit all over the world, all country, all nation, they are exposed by higher spending and drop in revenue because of the pandemic. So they increase in terms of their debt, and their fiscal space is shrinking. And that's why we need to recover our, what we call it, fiscal space and strength in order for us to be able to continue this policy at this development program. Yes, sure.
To be clear then, no more big set reforms on the agenda. It's either bringing back online stuff that has been shelved or reformulating it. But another tax amnesty, another sort of omnibus labor reform of that ilk, that's done.
Well, passing the legislation is one very important milestone. Of course, as a democratic system, you really have to deal with the legislator and drafting the law, and then but that's one thing. Implementing it is going to be another challenge, right, Jeffrey? So in this case, we've already passed, even on our omnibus law job creation, because Indonesia is a democratic system, there is a time of reviewing, judicial review on the constitutional court. And now we have to really amend part of this in order for us to be able to actually making sure that this omnibus law will be able to be implemented. So it's not always like an easy, like like in a democratic system, right? In this case, you really have many of the regulation as well as process that need to be abided. And for us, like on a taxation, again, also we just passed this tax law with harmonizing tax law, which include the revision of the income tax, value-added tax. We call it voluntary disclosure program. We also have the general, what you call it, amendment on the general provision law, which allowing us to create a much more, what you call it, reward and punishment in a more balanced way. We also revised the custom. So all area on the revenue side has been addressed in this omnibus on a harmonizing tax law. We do hope that this is going to expand the tax base. It's going to be, in this case, creating a just, equitable tax system in Indonesia, and especially also creating and addressing the issue of tax evasion and tax fraud that could happen, and it also happening at this very moment. So that is the area that we are addressing.
Kevin?
Yeah, I'm hoping you can help me. I want to see if we're worrying about some of the same things. When I talk to some of my subscribers and international observers and financiers who watch Indonesia, they talk about postponing elections, even if it were to happen constitutionally. Seems like it could disrupt confidence in Indonesia and potentially even affect the risk premium for the country and adversely affect the investment climate that way. So in that sense, politics and economics are tied together, as we know. Is this something that concerns you? It seems distressing to me because it's happening at a very awkward time, at a time when these reforms that you've just explained are providing a really bright outlook for Indonesia, and also awkward because there's heightened tensions internationally between authoritarian and democratic systems. And here, Indonesia, a very successful democracy, is making sounds about adversely reforming its democratic institutions. Can you help me with this?
Well, Indonesia, is actually built and run based on our constitution. So the constitution stipulated very explicitly that the term of the government is only 2 times. And also in this case, that the democratic system of passing from one term to another term will be conducted through the election. As of now, as a finance minister, I do understand that there is a decision already regarding first the date of the election in 2024. So it's already agreed by the parliament and the government. There is also a preparation by the commission on an election. So they've already now drafting, or in this case, preparing the budget. So we know that this is going to be a very tight priority for many, especially during this pandemic. But it doesn't mean that this priority for the democratic system to be upheld is going to be second prioritized. It's going to be the first priority. So we are still continue in this case preparing for that. As of some people talking about this, I think, well, that's their discussion. It should not distract the fact that Indonesia continue doing our reform, strengthening our economy, also strengthening our democracy in a way, and also preparing a smooth transition of power, as what we've already witnessing in the 20 years after the reform. Yeah.
Minister, can I just clarify? Maybe I've misunderstood. There are other priorities than safeguarding democracy, the pandemic?
No. I think you're wrong. What happened in any country? I think in any country you always have a lot of priority, as I said. In this case, priority, for example, like this pandemic has overtaken many of our priority. As I said earlier, when I explained to you, when we start with the second term, we have a lot of priority of reforming ourselves, investing in human capital, infrastructure development, and so on. And then it was overtaken by the pandemic, and that's become the highest priority. Now we are entering the 3rd year of the pandemic, and we continue, as I said earlier, juggling between this reform and all. But when we have this, what you call it, scheduled election as a democratic system, this has become the priority. So it should not be saying that you cannot like, oh, okay, because we are busy with the pandemic and others, then you really have to set aside this democratic system. Because that is the foundation. So you cannot say that, oh, because the money will be used for pandemic, then you don't have money for this. And despite our fiscal position is actually getting better, so it's not really an excuse for that.
Ibu Sri, I just have to point out, I think that there are 2 other ministers in the cabinet, coordinating ministers, who are saying quite the opposite. They're saying that because there's a pandemic, there cannot be an election on time.
Well,
I don't have a question.
I'm just saying what we are now doing, that is, as I said, that the schedule of the election has been decided and agreed between government and the parliament. So, and the preparation has been started and they are now drafting. So that is my statement.
We need to push a little bit further here. When your boss took the job, there was a sunset, October 2024. He has not said that he would respect that. He would not say that he will not be in office November 2024. Do you think?
Well, it is the constitutional mandate, so you don't have to say it. I mean, no one can say that, oh, I don't want to go out from the office. No, it's constitutional mandate. If you want to stay, then you are actually doing something which is against constitution, which in Indonesia is really a breach, it's very serious in this case. So I think, yeah, it is a mandate of the constitution.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Let me turn to another huge issue right now, the economic impacts of the invasion of Ukraine. I'm sure this is a question you're receiving a lot. First, I mean, there's many. How about a default by Russia on its external debt? Are you anticipating impacts on capital flows for emerging markets? And if so, how do you feel that Indonesia will weather that?
Well, this is one of what we are discussing also not only within Indonesia, but I'm sure this is really affecting globally, because this is not about the war in Ukraine, but also in terms of the principle of the global order in this case, and at the same time also the implication on the economy globally. We are actually in the G20, we are discussing on the first session is actually how we recover from the pandemic. Even in this case, the discussion very specific about how we should exit from the policy which is extraordinary during this pandemic, so that the tools on the monetary side, fiscal side, and financial side is going to be restored to a more normal order. Because you cannot use this extraordinary for long, then it will threatening the sustainability of monetary policy, credibility, fiscal policy, as well as the stability of financial sector. So within this G20, at least on the finance track, we are actually discussing about the global financial recovery and how country can and should design the exit policy. And then we hit hard by this another shock, which is the war, which have a spillover very significantly, because the economic tools is become economic sanction is actually using the economic tools as a tools for handling this conflict. And that's why the implication is just so direct and obvious. Whether this is in the form of the commodity price, you mentioned about the sanction on the central bank, and also in this case now the issue about repayment of the debt of the Russia. I think we should, on the one hand, we really look this as a global risk. The global risk meaning that even before the conflict, the inflation globally, especially in advanced countries, has already accelerated because of the supply disruption, because of the demand, pent-up demand, which is immediately surged after the COVID has been relatively managed and vaccination has been increased. So we have this supply-demand disruption, which is not coherent or consistent, harmonized. So it created inflation. Many of the authority, in this case monetary policy or authority, looking at what is the option that they have to make, whether this inflation is going to be temporary or not. And then we have this war, which then worsening the trend on the commodity price. If you look at the commodity price on gas, oil, even nickel, coal, CPO, they are all wheat, they are soybean. It's a lot of combination between both the after pandemic recovery process, which is not even, and then combined with climate change. If you look at, for example, like soybean, they are all affected by the climate change, worse drought in Brazil. And then now with the geopolitical in the form of conflict, which is worsening. So basically what I'm saying, this is really a big risk for the global economy. Maybe even it can affect the global economic order if the world cannot come up with what you call it thinking, how we are going to deal with this coexist or live together within what we call it the peaceful order. Because all what we witnessing in the past 40 years, maybe, you talk about globalization, in which all country is supposed to be a winner of this policy, right? That country can actually achieve their progress to globalization by trade, investment, openness, and then all cooperation. Now it changed. So that is going to be one of the most important implications. As of immediate implication, Kevin, that you mentioned, the increasing commodity price in Indonesia, because we are commodity producer, definitely we have some what you call it windfall, quote unquote, of this commodity. But also at the same time, because of the shock of this inflation coming from the commodity, the question for the government, are we going to pass through this inflation directly to the people, or we are going to create a cushion through our subsidy or fiscal in this case. This is a policy option that we are continue to calibrate, because there is no what you call it one easy straightforward answer. We really have to look at what is the development and how this development will affect weekly, monthly, or even in this case yearly.
Right. First, can you explain the new CPO policy?
Well, the CPO, Indonesia is the largest CPO producer. And also, of course, in this case, the demand for this cooking oil is increased even before the conflict, and now increasingly because of course, the disruption in Europe, which is affecting the supply of the sunflower oil and so on. And that's, on the one hand, certainly creating it, as I say, for Indonesia as the largest producer, there is a windfall revenue from that. But that creating also a pressure for us in terms of the raw material for the cooking oil, also for other material which is using the CPO, like the cosmetic as well as other product. So definitely this, what you call it, inflation spillover will be actually coming to our own domestic economy. So the question for the government in this case is how you are going to be able to first protecting the recovery process, which is still at the very early stage after a very deep shock from the pandemic. We are still aiming to recover our economy, and recovery of the economy, meaning from the demand side, consumption is the biggest demand driven for our economy. So if the consumption will be eroded because of the high inflation, like what happened in many of advanced countries, then immediately this recovery will be weakened. So we really have to now making sure that on this, especially CPO, finding the right balance. On the one hand, we know that we cannot fight market mechanism. If you try to fight those, there will be what you call it, black market smuggling. And even in this case, you try to regulate and then you can find that you can say that you should sell the oil, cooking oil by this price, and nobody want to sell it. And that is already now being corrected. You are going to sell at the regular part, but the government, as part of our affirmation to the people, especially the people which is needed most, the most vulnerable people, then we have to have a certain policy that creating a mechanism to protect them from this huge shock. And that can be in the form of, now we try to regulate the price only for what we call it, the curah is actually the cooking oil which is not packed. And also at the same time, we are considering very seriously providing a social safety net, especially for almost 18 or 19 million households in Indonesia. So these are all the combination policy options that we are having. Otherwise, now we know that the demand supply as well as the market price is something that we really need to address and to manage without really fighting. That can be very futile. But at the same time, we have to be also make sure that the government have the ability to step in and protecting, especially the most vulnerable one.
I want to jump in there and ask you for a little bit more detail on the social safety net. Also, the $65,000 question is whether the so-called windfall from commodity exports will cover the rise in subsidies that the government will inevitably have to pay to keep a lid on fuel. But will it be a wash?
Well, Jeffrey, we know that when there is a shock in the economy, the option for any policymaker is actually you allow the shock to pass through directly and then immediately to the people or to the economy. Or you still have any option of creating a certain cushion, whether this is in the form of the strength of the shock will be weakened. It cannot be totally, in this case, isolated, but it's not going to be like the real hard shock that will then breaking down the society or the economy. Right. Or you actually then allowing the shock that is breaking down. So if you still have a space on your fiscal side, then you have this option. You can create a certain cushion. It doesn't mean that you are going to absorb the whole shock, but making sure that the shock will be then transmitted in a way that can be handled by the economy and the people. That is exactly. So it is not really like the thinking about, oh, are you going to like use your fiscal tool protecting the whole people and economy from totally like this shock, so that they are totally like not feeling totally. I don't think that is going to be a realistic target. So for us, that's why exactly the target is actually who's the most vulnerable, who's the one who's actually in this very situation is going to be like easily drop into the poverty line again. What kind? Then again, if you agree on the target, the second challenge is what mechanism to reach out to this particular vulnerable group. In Indonesia, we've already have the social protection program, in which we have around 10 million of what we call it the family hope program. This is by name, by address, by account number. We also have what you call it the Sabako. This is like the food program or staple goods subsidy in the form of coupon. This is also again by name, by account number. So at least we have this, as I said, around almost close to 19 million family, which then if you add to the village level, don't forget that Indonesia also have still many villages. And within this village level, we also have another instrument that is a direct transfer to the village. So combination of all this is actually protecting or providing a certain cushion. Again, I'm not saying that you are going totally like eliminating the shock. But as I said, policy tools, instrument, and design in order to lessen the shock so that the early recovery process of the economy as well as the vulnerability of the people is not going to be destroyed because of this unprecedented and extraordinary shock.
I understand.
Yeah, Ibu Sri, with that all very clearly understood now, how bad do you envision the wheat prices in particular impacting Indonesia and affecting food price inflation and poverty levels? Is that something that Indonesia can accommodate because it's primarily a consumer of rice and maybe the rice price won't spike so much? Or is this a concern for you?
Well, there is always a concern regarding any food price increase. And of course, Indonesia, even though we said that the staple goods is rice, but many people now, especially on the urban area or even in the village area, they are converted into wheat, not only in the form of bread, but noodle, which is becoming a very, very important product in Indonesia. So basically, it will be affected soon or later in this case. And that is exactly how we are trying to really look at what composition on the food which is affected by this high price of the food. It is not only wheat, we also have the soybean, as I mentioned, corn in a way, which is going to be then cooking oil, as I mentioned earlier. So food price is going to be one of the most important within our inflation factor that need to be watched very carefully. And that's why we discuss within the cabinet what kind of the food security that Indonesia should be strengthened, responding to this kind of situation. Of course, as I said and explained earlier, some of the shock cannot be totally absorbed by the government. So some will be then felt by the people, but maybe some significant portion need and could be absorbed when we have this fiscal space. That's why Kevin and Jeffrey, in this case, during this very extraordinary challenge, even during this pandemic, fiscal tools, that is our budget, is the most important tool because they are providing all this flexibility of protecting people when they are threatening by the pandemic. They are now becoming very important tools to protect people when they are threatening by the increasing commodity price. They are becoming important tools in creating confidence of the recovery. And that's why, as a finance minister, I really have to taking care of this fiscal tool because you cannot overuse it for long, just like your physical, if you are exercising for long without any break, then you are not going to be healthier. Instead, you are going to be like breaking down. This is just a simple analogy in a way that this fiscal tool, which is working extremely hard during this very extraordinary situation. But at some point, this fiscal need to be continued to also return to their, what you call it, health and normal situation. And that's why reform in the fiscal side is very important, as I said earlier, on the taxation, revenue, and even in this case, we improve and looking at a very detail on the expenditure side. Because as I said, the expenditure is going to be quite dominated by this safety net or cushion from this shock.
And does that safety net and cushion involve assistance regulating fuel prices? Because economists are telling me that the government's budget on this will blow out to somewhere in the order of 200 trillion.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
The instrument in this case, Jeffrey, if you are regulating the price, we call it the administered price, there is an implication if there is a gap between the administered price with the market price, then this need to be compensated as a subsidy and that is exactly what we are doing. And some economists rightly will say, do you have money to provide those subsidy or compensation? So people will watch now very carefully our budget, how much then the increasing subsidy will be dominating our budget. If we try to, as I said, providing a very thick cushion to the economy and the people in this case. And we look at the electricity, we look at the fuel price, in addition to what I mentioned about the food price. So these are all hit. And if you look at many countries, if you go out and have to fill your tank, I know that this is now becoming how much? $7 per barrel, per gallon. I don't know. But when I was there in the United States 7 years ago or 8 years, it's only like below $3. So it is going to be like the inflation which is felt directly by the people. All countries facing with the same situation, the policy option is actually for us to provide cushion. Now, for us, Jeffrey, in this case, we are going to find the right balance. First, as I said, recovery of the economy, very important. Protecting, especially the most vulnerable, is very important. Whether this is going to create pressure on the fiscal, yes. Do we have flexibility? Yes, we have. As I said, because we also receiving a windfall profit because we are also commodity producer. So we use this windfall, part of it to cushion the people, part of it is actually try to continue our reform in this case. So these are all what we are trying to manage within our fiscal. So triple objective, protecting vulnerable as well as the recovery of economy, and then recovering of the health of our fiscal, that is our budget. And the third one is try to continue reform, which is still very important for us to build the stronger foundation for Indonesia economy.
Yeah, well, on that thought about building reforms for the future, specifically with regard to revenue collection, you mentioned there's windfalls from the high commodity prices, but those, of course, could go away very quickly at any point in time. Who knows? So for the sustainable increase of revenue from income tax collection in particular, what sorts of reforms are underway, and any implementing regulations coming out from the harmonization law soon? And also, finally, while we're on the topic and I'm at it here, how about the VAT increase on April 1st? Any news on that development? Thanks.
Well, first, this harmonizing tax policy consists of all parts that supporting the fiscal framework, especially on the revenue side. As I mentioned earlier, general provision, which is related to the reward and punishment and simplifying the mechanism if the people want to pay tax, if there is a fraud, what kind of settlement, these are all being modernized or has been reformed. So that's the cost of implementation, and especially the revenue priority is going to be like the most important rather than maybe the criminal charge itself. So we don't want to go there. That is the most important on that part. The second one is related on the income tax. As you can see that we are adding top bracket because of Indonesia, we have quite a skewed, more people becoming very rich and the top 5%, but the people in the middle and lower is still there. So if you are trying to design a much more, what you call it, just or equal system, we put additional bracket on top from 30% to 35% for those who earn more than 5 billion per year. I think this is only a few percentage of the people in Indonesia, but that's, I think, is the right thing comparing to the middle class. And then we also, on the one hand, providing more support for the lower level. So informal sector, especially ultra, micro, small, medium enterprises, they are actually enjoying a certain additional bracket that they are untaxable, and that's creating a relief for them. And then on also we are providing, in this case, as I said, a tax compliance program for those which is not yet comply for 2016 pass as well as until 2020. We are providing this opportunity for you to disclose, and then we are going to combine with our global taxation regime now, automatic exchange of information. We are going to provide a much bigger basis for the taxation. We are going to also, at the same time, as you mentioned, the VAT, the decision is for 10% to become 11% by April. This is now under preparation. We know that this is really like in a still very fragile situation, but we know that this is also need to be introduced in a smooth way. So we try a combination between providing the social protection as well as other program, so that this can be introduced without creating a huge shock to the economy. I think this is what we are trying to do at this very moment. And we also have a carbon tax, actually. This is one very important piece of new instrument related to the climate change, as well as new mechanism dealing with the carbon market and carbon tax. So a lot of very busy. They are now undergoing implementation plan. So on a regulatory framework below the law is being now finalized, so that we do hope that we are going to be able to continue implement this very important reform.
Yeah, and on that topic, carbon trading, a price and cap scheme, what time frame do you anticipate for bringing that into effect with the regulation that came out late last year about that?
Well, the carbon trading is the market mechanism is now being designed and implemented. Government regulation as a foundation for this regulation is now being designed. We've already introduced at a very narrow scope on a PLN, that is the electricity company, using the cap and trade first, meaning that each power plan will have a certain level of carbon that need to be abide. And if you are above or below that, then you can actually trade among themselves. And the price that we introduce is low enough, $3 per ton of the CO2. This is because we try to test the market mechanism, and we don't want to add more shock on the economy at this very moment, but at least there is a familiarity in terms of the mechanism and also building the credibility of the market itself. So that is now being passed, and carbon tax will be introduced along with this action plan on the whole climate change implementation. So it will be stages. First on as I said, electricity, especially on the PLN, and then we will see how this is going to be implemented in a much wider scope. But of course, as I said, the action plan is now being designed. So we want to see how the discussion with the business community, with the population, there are very encouraging signs. For example, if I talk to many of the young people in Indonesia, the millennial generation, they are very aware about this climate change. They want Indonesia to also address this issue. They even say that this has become one of their highest priority. They want to see the government to implement. And even in this case, quite interesting to see that they even willing to pay. So this is really a different generation from maybe the older one, in which they have the what you call it, care on this world or earth in this case in terms of the sustainability. So we will look and calibrate the policy along this first, the recovery process, the discussion with the business community, with the population, educate people, and we also at the same time establish the market mechanism and introduce the instrument like cap and trade as well as carbon tax.
I wanted to ask you a question, Minister, about the G20 and about how you expect that to play out given the circumstances geopolitically. Australia has already intimated that they won't come if Russia does. China has sided very closely, more or less, with Russia. And there's a whole other camp. Indonesia and the likes of India are in different camps. What is the likelihood of the G20 being able to produce something that is constructive and balanced, given these shifting, well, this increasing polarization, where there's so much distrust, and it may very well fall apart. Do you see a role for the G20, given the rhetoric that we're hearing now from the likes of China and Australia?
Well, G20 was created as an economic premier forum for cooperation, because at that time, especially the G20 at the leaders level, was created to avert the, what you call it, the threat to the global economy, which is very obvious, that no country can face it alone. So the G20 was actually created with that kind of spirit. There is no article of agreement. It's just like at that time, I was finance minister, so I was called by Tim Geithner and some other finance minister, and okay, can we like create this like G20 at the leaders level, because the threat of collapsing economy, entering what is the deepest recession, or even in this case, what you call it, economic devastation because of the global economic and financial crisis. So that was like the spirit at that time. And it worked in the sense that we can avert this catastrophic consequence of global financial with this cooperation. Right. And of course, at that time, the cooperation creating a one coordinated response for all countries, whether this is on the monetary side, fiscal side, financial side, and regulatory side. And that is creating what we call it a confidence back to the global economy. Yep. Now, the situation today is totally different. Yep. When then this cooperation in itself is not being able to be maintained because of the action by the G20 members, right? But unlike in the IMF World Bank, in which they have the article of agreement, so basically the article of agreement saying that, well, if you continue following the membership protocol, then you are within this club. But if it is not, then you are out. G20 is based on consensus. So basically, under Indonesia presidency, this is, I must say, a very challenging task. Because if you look at all the G20 before Indonesia presidency, they are all, regardless ups and downs, no one facing this kind of situation. Of course, at that time, there is a Crimea in 2014, but that was like in that a different scale from the two-day situation in Ukraine. At that time, the G20 is just focusing on how to help Ukraine because of that attack in the Crimea. So this situation is much bigger because the European feel there is a really on their front door, very imminent attack as well as threat to their own economic and well-being and security of the people. So you mentioned about this level of cooperation. Yes, it is becoming very divided. But at the same time, Indonesia also discussing, we are reaching out to all the G20 members. As I said, there is no article of agreement. This is a consensus based. So we are reaching out to all the G20 members and saying that, do you think that this cooperation is very important? Indonesia is continue trying to implement the agenda of the G20 of this cooperation, that is global recovery. We talk about digital economy. We talk about climate change. So all those things. And they said that, yes, we need that, regardless of their position. So basically, the G20 members, they feel that this cooperation needs to continue to be safe. Despite,
so you're confident that the adults will prevail.
What is that again, Jeffrey?
You're confident that the G20 will go through, cooler heads will prevail.
The confidence is really depend on how we are going to we confidence because we are reaching out, but we know that the difficulty is not to be underestimated, because and if the party which is now in this situation is going to be even widened, so there is always a possibility regarding what kind of format which is still in this case acceptable for all the G20 members to still save the cooperation part, but in this case acceptable under current circumstances. We do hope that in this case at the leader level is going to be next October, but there is a finance minister meeting which is going to be in the next couple of months, and that's why it is much more imminent for us to decide. And this, as I said, because of this war as well as the economy cannot be separated, because they are using economic sanction. So you cannot avoid that this is becoming an issue that will affect the G20 discussion. So we will continue consult, and we do hope that we are going to come up with a workable format of meeting. And certainly when we discuss with all member countries, they are still supporting the Indonesia agenda. That is all the agenda related to first on issue of the threat to the global economy, health and finance, digital economy, global taxation, sustainable finance. I mean, regardless, at the end, we need to address this issue, especially if that threat is going to be global, like climate change. No country can face it alone, right? This is going to be a threat for the world. So that's why I think this is really the role of Indonesia now, making sure that the cooperation is going to be continued, maintained, even though maybe the format as well as the structure maybe will have some change because of the situation that we are facing today.
Excluding Russia is not an option, or is everything still on the table?
Well, the G20 membership, as I said, is a consensus. So it's not like the membership that I can, but certainly we communicate with all the member countries, including Russia in this case, and United States, G7, Australia. They are all in this case still at this very moment, given what the situation, there is really a very big distance between the Russia in this case and especially G7. So this is a fact that we are facing at this very moment. It's a very big distance. So really like bridging this gap is something which is very critical. But even for other member country, even China and others, they want to actually try to create a certain also, a bridge, so that again, everybody agree that the cooperation still need to be maintained. For the medium and long-term proposed objective, I think all countries still have the interest to see this group to be at the spirit of the cooperation, despite what is happening today. It's actually need to be safe or to be maintained. So we'll try our best. Wish us luck in this case, Kevin and Jeffrey.
Yes. Yeah, I don't envy you.
Always, I don't envy. Yeah.
Do you anticipate going to Washington, D.C. at the end of the month for the ASEAN summit with the U.S. or is there any update on that?
Well, the visit to the U.S. is actually not only one single agenda usually. The spring meeting is definitely there, but I just heard this morning that they are now changing the format again to become a hybrid in this case. So it's initially they are actually want to introduce more physical present. Now they are coming back to the hybrid. There are a couple of other, not only event, but meeting also in the United States. So I'll look at my both priority schedule and of course the urgency to be in many of those meetings. So we'll see. I will look at all the schedule. It's still very fluid at this very moment, Kevin.
Okay.
Okay.
We have one last question. I'd like to yeah, I'd like to follow up, Ibu Sri, about involving women in the workforce to boost the economy and improve welfare. This seems like something that is within reach. It's a feasible way to boost Indonesia's GDP. Are there some reforms you have in mind to pursue that? And also, I was wondering on a personal level, do you try to help foster leadership in your ministry by encouraging the promotion of women and supporting their advancement in what can often be a very patronage-dominated world we live in?
Yeah, I think there are many studies already providing an evidence that providing an equal opportunity for women will provide a strong boost to the economy. McKinsey study is showing that 26%, or in this case, 25 trillion US dollar, 26% of the GDP globally can be increased if you are providing more opportunity and role for the woman. The question is maybe not just that evidence. The question is how, especially because many women are facing with still obstacles, or in this case, some which is not at what we call it a level playing field if you compare with our counterpart, the men. And that's why the question, if you want to have more women participation in Indonesia, labor participation for women is still also below men. And also, if you look at the salary, there is also a gap. So the question in this case, what policy that need to be introduced? I think we have to look at what is the obstacle and the hindrance for the women to participate. Usually because they are expecting to do their domestic work. And especially also in this case, they are also have to juggle between family and career, if this is going to be on a city side or urban side. So in this kind of situation, then some policy that can relieve those kind of choices, trade-off, is going to be like helping. For example, in this case, of course, on the education side, from primary, we've already provided an equal opportunity. Up to the even high school, they are going to be the one usually is still relatively equal. But for the lower income family, usually the dropout for the woman is much bigger because they are the one who were asked to actually help their family first. And that is exactly poverty reduction definitely will have an implication on this ability of the children, women, girls in this case, to continue. And then if you are in the job market, as I said, that this juggling and trade-off, the choice which is becoming very hard can be lessened, for example, by providing from the maternity leave, paternity leave. This is exactly what I introduced in the Ministry of Finance, that now we also provide paternity leave. And then at the same time, there is a lactation for the woman, which is having the baby, and childcare. I think that's going to be also very important. On the career and the Ministry of Finance, I've already asked a certain protocol that for a woman to be promoted. We see actually when they are entering Ministry of Finance, it's almost 50-50. Men and women is almost equal. And then the dropout ratio will continue, especially at the first level of what you call it structural position. Usually at that time, there is like a drop. And then if you go going up, it's getting higher. Then we only have now around 17% at the top level. So in this case, I think this is going to be one of the most important challenges, that the dropout ratio has nothing to do with their capacity, but more on their opportunity and the challenge to juggle. So yes, in the Ministry of Finance, we have the gender-based budgeting. We provide coaching for the woman. We also have a certain, even in this case, quota. For me, I'm not going to process any promotion if there is no woman as a candidate. So this kind of situation will provide a certain very clear, signal for our team in the Ministry of Finance to actually implement this kind of affirmative without distorting based on the merit system.
One last question. While your boss has left open a small window that he would be willing to serve past October 24th and maybe a third term, would there be a third term for Sri Mulyani as a finance minister?
Jeffrey, I've been working for Indonesia. It's been quite long, and I actually, in this case, in the Ministry of Finance, we continue grooming many of the younger generation. So I think the health of any organization and also the success of leadership will be judged on whether you were able to groom or provide a better generation than yourself in this case. So in this case, I think in many of my organization, I provide a lot of opportunity for my own vice minister, deputy minister, or even in this case, younger professional. You should take charge. You should be able anytime. No one actually indispensable in this case. So in this case, just prepare, because Indonesia is a big country. The journey is going to be still long, and maybe the challenge is going to be hard or harder in this case. So even though during this kind of situation like pandemic or climate change or in now G20, I actually allowing all my team to be able to actually showing themselves their leadership and opportunity. So what I'm saying, Jeffrey, in this case, I think no one indispensable is in this case. The country will continue. And it is my responsibility to prepare Ministry of Finance and especially their staff to be able to actually assume those responsibility in a competent way, professional way, with the high integrity. I think that is the most important one. So that's my answer to your question.
If you want to start a podcast, DM me. We can set you up. Have you considered podcast?
Yeah,
You have options.
Sure. That's gonna be my next career after this. Yeah, okay. That's
It's
a good option.
not so bad.
Thank you,
The
Kevin.
money.
Okay. Thank you.
Good to
Till
talk
next
to you.
time.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.